Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 15th May 2025 and today we have some very important topics for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. So we have a list of topics, and the first topic is about the genome edited rice varieties that recently these genome edited rice varieties have been introduced. And in fact, India became the first country to introduce the genome edited rice varieties. So in this article, we'll understand how the genome edited rice varieties or genome edited plants are different from the genetically modified organisms. And we will also understand what are the advantages of the genome edited rice varieties over the conventional rice varieties and how they are going to benefit our farming community. So secondly, we have another important article, that is that Sikkim completed 50 years of statehood. So we'll also understand how Sikkim became part of India. So earlier it was a protectorate during immediately after India's independence, but in 1970s Sikkim became a full-fledged state of India. So we'll also understand that as well. And next, a new Chief Justice of India has been appointed, and we'll also understand how Chief Justice of India is being appointed, and we'll also understand the removal of judges as well. And another important article, the wholesale price index, and it is being said that the inflation of under wholesale price index has came down to 9 months low. So we primarily understand what is the base year of wholesale price index, how it is calculated, what are the basic commodities which are part of the wholesale price index, and how wholesale price index is different from the consumer price index. So we'll also understand all these different dimensions which revolves around this particular topic. So therefore, without any further delay, let's get into the discussion. The first topic is how India developed the genome edited rice variety. And we have already discussed about this, how India has introduced the genome edited rice varieties. So these rice varieties have different advantages. We can also call them as climate resilient crops, right? So climate resilient crops because they can be drought tolerant, salinity tolerant, pest tolerant. They can also increase the yield, or they can give increased yields. So because of all those reasons, so we could actually call them much more better than the conventional rice varieties. So if you look at the context is that recently India has introduced the first world's first rice varieties called DRR Dun 100, which is also called as Kamala, Pusa DST Rice 1. So these two rice varieties have been produced by genome editing technology. So we'll understand what exactly is this genome editing technology and how genome editing technology works and how it is different from the genetically modified organisms. Now, in fact, this is considered as a breakthrough technology because India is the first country in the world which has produced the genome edited rice varieties. It has a number of advantages because it promises to address the critical challenges in India's agriculture sector, such as climate change. So climate change poses a major threat to Indian agriculture. So through the genome edited rice varieties, we can address climate change and pest resistance, addressing climate change in the sense that the impact of agriculture, the impact of climate change on agriculture can be addressed by the genome edited rice varieties. Now understand one thing, so climate change has resulted in increased temperatures, increased droughts, or errant rainfall, or increased flooding like conditions, right? So the new rice varieties will be able to tolerate all these negative effects of climate change. Secondly, they could be more and more pest resistant. So farmers will not there is no need for the farmers to use excessive amounts of fertilizers as well, and it will substantially reduce the input cost on the part of the farmers. So this is another advantage. So reducing input cost means that there will be more profit or remunerative income for the farmers from the agriculture sector, and that incentivizes and encourages farmers to continue in agriculture. And in fact, it can also address the problem of water scarcity. Now, in fact, Indian agriculture is responsible for the exploitation of the groundwater resources, and in fact the largest user of the groundwater resources. India is world's largest user of the groundwater resources. And agriculture sector, since agriculture sector is mostly the water intensive, and in fact it is a traditional irrigation practices are still followed, where we just flood the fields with the water instead of adopting the micro irrigation. So we have not adopted micro irrigation techniques. So because of that reason, what has been happening, it has been creating the problem of water scarcity in Indian agriculture. So water scarcity over a period of time will also impact the agriculture sector as well. So ultimately this genome edited rice variety will address all these problems, along with increasing crop yield and also addressing the nutritional quality that is required, so that we could address problems like malnutrition which has been existing, the problem of anemia among women and adolescent girls, right? So all these problems can be addressed, along with ensuring remunerative incomes for the farmers. Now the basic question is how genome editing is different from the genetic modification, or we can also call it as genetically modified organisms. So how the genome editing is different from this genetic modification? So it is a very basic. So we'll try to understand this aspect as well. Now when we talk about this genome editing, so genome editing is essentially based on the biotechnology and its techniques, right? So it essentially based on the techniques of biotechnology. And in fact, the very same genome editing will allow scientists to make precise changes in an organism's DNA. For example, imagine that there is an organism's DNA, and if farmers wanted to make certain changes in the genetic makeup of a particular plant species, so they can be able to do such changes, and those changes are also called as precise changes, and this is what is called as the genome editing. However, so within the genome of that particular organism itself, the genetic changes would be made, and that is the genome editing. But on the other hand, what is this genetically modified organisms? For example, BT cotton is an example of genetically modified organism, and BT brinjal is also an example of the genetically modified organism. However, BT brinjal has not been approved for the commercial cultivation in India because of the health concerns and the environmental concerns as well, right? So now we have understood the genome editing. So in genome editing, organisms DNA, so within the organism's DNA certain changes would be made, certain desirable changes would be made. So however, when we talk about the genetic modification, so what happens is that a foreign gene would be introduced. For example, this is a plant species, and within that particular plant species a foreign genome would be introduced to replace the already existing genes of a particular portion of the species that we wanted to achieve the desirable characteristics, right? So this is the difference between genetic modification and the genome editing. And now the genome editing actually involves editing specific parts of the genome, right? So if you take the genome, so there will be editing of specific parts within the genome, and there will be no introduction of any other foreign species DNA or genes from the foreign species. But with respect to genetic modification, what happens that certain genes from other species will be introduced into the genetic structure or genetic makeup, and that is the basic difference. So however, there are different types of genome editing techniques. So it is essentially categorized or classified into three different types of genome editing techniques. Right, so these three types of genome editing techniques are very often called as a site directed nuclease methods, or which are also called as SDN methods. Site directed nuclease methods are the different techniques of genome editing. There are three different techniques of site directed nuclease methods. So the first method is SDN1. What happens in this SDN1 method? So in SDN1 method, DNA is cut at a specific location. So imagine that this is the location that we need to cut the DNA. So in SDN1, this particular location, so DNA is cut down, and the cell, once the DNA is cut down in that particular part, the cell automatically repairs the break naturally. So thereby it causes small mutations, and that also occur naturally as well. Second one is SDN2, site directed nuclease technique number or method number 2. So in this method, a DNA is cut and a small piece of DNA is introduced. For example, imagine that this is the DNA. So in this DNA, so DNA is cut through, and in this particular part, a small portion of DNA is introduced from the same organism, right? So that is to guide and repair the process, making a very precise changes, to the point changes, and that is what is called as SDN2 method. Now what is this SDN3 method? This SDN3 method is also called as a method which is used for producing the genetically modified organisms. So in SDN3 method, generally what happens is that a foreign DNA will be inserted into the genome. Now in SDN1 and SDN2, there will be no foreign genome introduced, but site directed nuclease method number 3, in this particular method, a foreign genome is introduced into an organism to which we wanted some desirable characteristics or qualities. And therefore this SDN3 method is also called as the traditional genetic modification method, right? So SDN3 method is also called as the traditional genetic modification method. So I hope you have understood SDN1 method, SDN2 method and SDN3 method of the genome editing. And in fact, the two rice varieties which are produced by Indian Council of Agricultural Research, right? So these two rice varieties have been produced by Indian Council of Agricultural Research. They have been developed using SDN1 technique and SDN2 technique. So here SDN3 technique has not been used when it comes to the production of the two rice varieties. These two rice varieties. So imagine if SDN3 as a method is used for the production of these rice varieties, so what happens that these rice varieties will also become a genetically modified rice varieties. But here these rice varieties are not the GM crops, they are the genome edited crops only, and they are also allowed for the commercial cultivation because they have used SDN1 and SDN2 methods, and they don't have adverse health and environmental concerns. So meaning that they do not contain any foreign genes. These two rice varieties have not contain any foreign genes, and thus they are not classified as the genetically modified crops. So I hope it is very clear for you. Now we'll understand, so these two rice varieties, what are the advantages and why the scientists have produced the genome edited rice varieties in India, right? So what are those two rice varieties? One is DRR Dhan 100, which is also called as Kamala, and Pusa DST rice 1. So these are two rice varieties which are produced by whom? Which are produced by Indian Council of Agricultural Research. And these two rice varieties are the genome edited rice varieties. Genome edited rice varieties. Remember, I already told you the difference between the genome edited plants or organisms and genetically modified crops. So now we'll understand this variety called Kamala. So this has been developed from a popular high yield rice variety called Samba Masuri. So Samba Masuri is a traditional high yielding rice variety in India. And in fact, this particular rice variety called Kamala has been developed from the already existing rice variety. However, this Kamala rice variety has several benefits, several advantages for the farming community. So we'll understand what are those advantages. Firstly, so it will result in higher yield, right? So ultimately farmers will get higher yield compared to the traditional rice varieties. So if higher yield means farmers' incomes can also be substantially increased, and this is an incentive for the farmers to engage in farming, and this could also increase food yield, and it ultimately ensures the food security of India as well. And India can also become the net exporter of the food grains, and also the feeder of the world as well. So this is the advantage, right? Because it would have the higher yield around 37 tons per hectare compared to 4.5 tons of Samba Masuri variety. Now you can imagine how significant the rice varieties yield increases, right? So traditional Samba Masuri variety just 4.5 tons, but this rice variety is 37 tons per hectare. And second advantage is that the Kamala rice variety would have a drought tolerance. So it is tolerant to drought. So because of climate change, erratic rainfall, failure of monsoon, dry conditions. But despite those conditions, the Kamala rice variety can easily sustain those conditions, right? So it has a high drought tolerance, and it can also has a better nitrogen use efficiency. So if any crop has a better nitrogen use efficiency, it actually increases the yield, increases the incomes of the farmers, and it also reduces the input cost of the farmers, because there will be no need for the farmers to use fertilizer very frequently if it has a better nitrogen use efficiency, and that is the advantage here. Third, so there will be early maturity also, right? So as of now, any rice variety would take hardly 3 to 4 months till harvesting, but about 20 days earlier than its parent variety, right? So harvesting can also takes place 20 days earlier than the parent variety called Samba Masuri, which actually saves a lot of water, fertilizer, and it also reduces methane emissions. Now remember that methane is a short-lived greenhouse gas, and in fact methane is also has a higher potency than the carbon dioxide when it comes to absorbing heat, right? So the global warming potential of methane is much more higher than the carbon dioxide, and in fact the paddy fields produces methane in anaerobic conditions. So therefore, if it reduces the maturity time by 20 days, it will also significantly reduce the methane emissions as well. And in fact, so the combination of traits actually make this Kamala rice variety a climate resilient, resource efficient rice variety, and ultimately it will benefit the farming community in India. And the second rice variety that is also developed through the genome editing technique. The second rice variety is Pusa DST Rice 1. Right, so this is Pusa DST Rice 1, and this has also been produced through the genome editing technique, and it has been developed from the MTU 1010 variety. So this variety is the parent variety of Pusa DST Rice 1, and in fact this rice performs better under stress conditions generally like inland salinity stress. So, right, so whenever there is such a stress, so this new rice variety will perform better, and its yields can also higher than the traditional rice varieties. And the other advantage is that it can withstand the higher levels of alkalinity and the soil salinity as well, because this rice variety actually shown that there is a 14.66% and 30.4% yield advantage compared to the traditional rice varieties, right? So the other thing that we should understand is that soil salinity is a problem in most of the agricultural land, because we just flood the fields with the water. So what happens is that the soil salinity has been increasing, and the sea water intrusion has also become a common phenomenon, right? So if you can look at the delta areas where the sea water intrusion during cyclones, or it is also because of the rising sea levels, the sea water intrusion generally makes that the soil salinity would increase manyfold, right? So this particular rice variety can also withstand the increased soil salinity, thereby increasing the incomes for the farmers. And this makes Pusa DST Rice 1, this particular variety, valuable for cultivation even in the salt affected areas. So we can also say that this particular rice variety can bring uncultivable lands under the cultivation as well. So these are the advantages of these two rice varieties which are produced through the genome editing technique. And how DNA editing actually works. So here a detailed description has been given how actually the genome editing is being done. So genome editing can be done using a technique called the CRISPR-Cas9 technique. So this technique is also very important. So the CRISPR-Cas9 technique is actually the genome editing technique. And in fact, so using this CRISPR-Cas9 technique, the genetic structure of a particular organism or genetic material of a particular organism can be edited. Now in fact, every organism has cells. Within cells there is a nucleus, and the nucleus consists of several chromosomes, and inherent of those chromosomes there is a genetic material. Now in this context, a cell is transfected with an enzyme. So this particular cell would have transfected with a complex, and this particular complex contains these elements. What are the elements? So it includes a guide molecule, a healthy DNA copy that we would like to replace. This is the healthy DNA molecule, for example, and we would like to replace this healthy DNA molecule with this particular portion of DNA. So therefore the complex actually consisting of the guide molecule, healthy DNA copy, and a DNA cutting enzyme as well. Now in this context, a specially designed synthetic guide molecule, so there will be guide molecule to actually guide the entire process. So this guide molecule is a synthetically designed guide molecule, right? So this guide molecule actually finds the target DNA strand. So this is the targeted DNA strand. So once guide molecule identifies the location where we would like to make changes in the genetic material, this DNA cutting enzyme would start cutting that particular portion, right? So this DNA cutting enzyme would start cutting that particular portion, and this defective DNA strand will be removed, and this part will be replaced with a healthy DNA, right? So healthy DNA strand will be replaced in this particular portion. So this is how the DNA editing would generally takes place, and CRISPR-Cas9 is a one technique through which the genome editing can be done. So you have also given what are the genetically modified crops, and are there any genetically modified crops in India which are approved for the commercial cultivation. So what is a GM crop? So we have understood, so in genome editing technique, so if it has the SDN3 method, so it will be considered as the genome genetically modified organism, right? So genetically modified organism, because the SDN3 method would have the foreign gene, So what is a GM crop? So it is a crop that has a gene artificially inserted into it from the another species. So that is the genetically modified organism, right? So why we are inserting a foreign gene into the DNA of a particular organism? To give it some desired properties. So we would like to give it some desired properties. For example, when it comes to the BT cotton, so the reason for introducing BT cotton is that it can withstand the pest attack of pink bollworm, right? So that is the desired property. So we would like to give some desired properties into it. So GM crops are mostly either pest resistant or they could be herbicide tolerant as well. So as of now we have only BT cotton. So this BT cotton rice variety is, the BT cotton is allowed for the commercial cultivation in India, but BT brinjal, BT mustard, which is not allowed for commercial cultivation in India because of some health and environmental concerns, right? So apart from that, another important topic is Sikkim celebrates 50 years of its statehood. So we'll understand how Sikkim has got formed and how a protectorate state turned into a full statehood, how it has got a full statehood. The context is that a race to watch butterflies has been one of the highlights of the celebration that has been marking the 50th year of Sikkim statehood. So during the celebrations of the 50th year of Sikkim's statehood, so they also wanted to protect the exotic butterflies within Sikkim, right? So there are a lot of butterflies within the Sikkim and they would like to protect these exotic butterflies as part of the celebration of their 50th year of Sikkim's statehood. And in fact, Sikkim has transitioned from a protectorate state to India's 22nd state in 1975. So you just have to remember this. So earlier Sikkim was India's protectorate after India became independent. So from the protectorate state to Sikkim become a full state, a 22nd state on May 16th, 1975. So in fact, actually Sikkim, before becoming part of India, so when it was a protectorate under India, so it was an independent kingdom. And it was ruled by a monarch called Chogyal. So this particular monarch family called Chogyal, so that used to rule the Sikkim. And Sikkim was an independent kingdom. So even after India's independence, before Sikkim became part of India as a full state. So although it had a close ties with India, especially after India's independence, Sikkim was not an Indian state. Sikkim was just a protectorate of India after India's independence. So it was a protectorate of India after India's independence. And in fact, the Sikkim functioned as a protectorate of India under 1950 Indo-Sikkim Treaty. So there was a treaty that was signed in 1950. Under this treaty, both Sikkim became the protectorate state of India. So under this 1950 Indo-Sikkim Treaty, so what happened was, under this particular arrangement, India controlled Sikkim's defense, external affairs and communication, right? So despite being Sikkim the protectorate of India, so India controlled Sikkim's defense, external affairs and communication, and Sikkim actually retained the autonomy in the internal administration. So internal administration will be carried out by Sikkim itself, but under 1950 Indo-Sikkim Treaty, India controlled defense, external affairs and communication of Sikkim. Now there are different states and union territories when they were formed, when they were given statehood. So it is very, very important that please go through it, right? So it is very important, and there is also a higher chance of asking questions from this portion as well. right? So you could see here Sikkim became a full state of India in 1975. There might be a chronological order. They might ask you to mention the chronological order of different states and their years of formation as well. So now, what are the events that led to the formation of Sikkim as a full state in India? So these events took place from 1973 to 1975. Now, in the early 1970s, what happened was there was an increasing political unrest. So that has started in Sikkim in early 1970s. And the political unrest in Sikkim was started because of the allegations of undemocratic rule by the existing ruler, Chongyal rulers. Right, so there were a massive allegations of the undemocratic rule that was carried out by the Chongyal family, and there were also demands for a more democracy should be established in Sikkim, and these demands were raised by the local political parties and even the people as well, and that has led to the increasing political unrest in Sikkim in early 1970s. And the situation has further escalated in the year 1973, and that has led to mass protests in entire Sikkim. So there was a mass protest in entire Sikkim. So they were primarily demanding that there should be more democracy in Sikkim. So however, India immediately intervened, and there was a tripartite agreement that was signed between the Chongyal, Indian government and also the Sikkim political parties, right? So a tripartite agreement was essentially signed between the Chongyal, Indian government and Sikkimese political parties, and ultimately leading to some constitutional reforms, and an elected government also took control of Sikkim's administration after this tripartite agreement, because it has allowed for a greater constitutional reforms. And after that, what happened was in 1974 the elected Sikkim assembly passed a resolution, and it wanted to associate with India as a full state, right? So after this resolution has been passed by the Sikkim state legislative assembly, finally in May 1975 a referendum was held. So in this referendum, around 97% of the people of Sikkim voted in favor of Sikkim becoming part of India. So that is actually a huge number of population wanted to become part of India. And then the Indian Parliament passed the 36th constitutional amendment. So remember this 36th constitutional amendment. This is important. This may be asked in your exam, because Sikkim turned Sikkim has been celebrating its 50th anniversary of its statehood. Right. So after this referendum, the 36th Constitutional Amendment Act has been passed by the Parliament, making Sikkim the 22nd, making Sikkim this 22nd state of India. Right. So this is how Sikkim became part of India. So I hope you have understood this. And the next important topic is, Indian Supreme Court has got a new Chief Justice of India. So we'll understand some details, some important details about the Chief Justice of India and how he is appointed, and the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court also. So we'll try to understand this. This is important for your exam. The context is that Justice Bhushan Ramakrishna Gawai, so he was sworn as the Chief Justice of India. Recently he sworn in as the Chief Justice of India, and he is the 52nd Chief Justice of India. So you just have to remember this. And Chief Justice of India Gawai succeeds the already existing Chief Justice Sanjeev Khanna. So Sanjeev Khanna was the previous Chief Justice of India. Right. So Justice Gawai succeeded the Chief Justice Sanjeev Khanna, who demoted from office on May 13 and will hold office till 23rd, 2025. November 23rd, 2025, CJI Gawai will hold this office. And in fact, so he is the 52nd Chief Justice of India. So who is Chief Justice of India and how Chief Justice of India is appointed? So Chief Justice of India is appointed by the President of India. So you just have to remember this: Chief Justice of India is appointed by the President. However, the process of the appointment of Chief Justice of India actually involves the consultation between the President and the current Chief Justice of India and other key officials, right? So this consultation will play a very important role in the appointment of Chief Justice of India by the President of India. And in fact, so an article, that is Article 124 of the Indian Constitution, deals with the appointment procedure of the Chief Justice of India, right? So what is that article? Article 124 of the Indian Constitution deals with the appointment of CJI. And in fact, the President of India, while appointing the Chief Justice of India, is required to consult with the following individuals. Who are the individuals that the President will consult while appointing the Chief Justice of India? So the individuals included the current Chief Justice of India, the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, as the President deems necessary. So in case if President deems it necessary to consult the judges of the High Court and the Supreme Court, then also the President would consult them as well. And the recommendation made by the outgoing Chief Justice of India will also play a very important role in selecting and appointing a new Chief Justice of India. So typically the outgoing Chief Justice of India recommends the name of the most senior judge of the Supreme Court as the next Chief Justice. So this is how judges are being appointed, and this is like a convention. And the seniority is determined based on the length of the service of a judge as a judge, right? So in fact, seniority is the basis for the appointment of a judge as the Chief Justice of India. The next most senior senior most judge will be appointed as the Chief Justice of India, and that will be determined based on the length of service as a judge. And in fact, so President's decision would be considered as, when after consulting all these individuals by the President, considering the recommendations that are made by the Chief Justice of India with respect to the appointment of the next CJI, President makes the final decision on the appointment of the Chief Justice of India. So ultimately it will be the President who takes the final decisions with respect to appointment of the new CJI, right? So therefore she will be appointing the next CJI. So before taking the office, so they have to go through the oath of office. So once appointed as the Chief Justice of India, the CJI will take the oath of office before the President of India. So you have to remember this. And apart from that, it is also very important to note that the appointment of Chief Justice of India is based on the principle of seniority. So seniority is the principle, so that is used determines who will be the next Chief Justice of India. So the senior most judge of the Supreme Court will be appointed as the judge of the Chief Justice of India. So however, the President is not bound by the principle of seniority, right? So this is very important. The President is actually not bound by the principle of seniority and has the discretion to appoint any judge of the Supreme Court as the Chief Justice of India. So this point is very important, so you have to remember this point. And in fact, so when we talk about the term of the Chief Justice of India, so he or she holds office until the age of 65 years or until retirement, whichever is earlier. So whichever is earlier, until 65 years or until his retirement. So this new Chief Justice of India will hold office for 6 months. And the Chief Justice demits office. The President appoints the next senior most judge of the Supreme Court as the new Chief Justice. And in fact, the process is designed to ensure independence of the judiciary and also the continuity of leadership within the Supreme Court as the highest court of appeal in India. Now, in fact, the third schedule deals with the oath and affirmation of offices, elected officials, including the judges. So therefore, you should have to remember the third schedule. So third schedule deals with the offices, all offices, but except the office of President and Vice President. So office of President and Vice President are not part of the third schedule, right? So therefore, third schedule essentially deals with oath and affirmation of offices for elected officials, including the judges as well. Now, this is how the impeachment process proceedings against any judge of the Supreme Court or High Court would be taken up. So in this process, a removal motion that will be signed by 100 members in case of Lok Sabha and 50 members in case of Rajya Sabha. They will submit this removal motion to the Speaker in case of Lok Sabha and Chairman in case of Rajya Sabha. So this is the first step for the impeachment of a judge, right? So secondly, if the motion is admitted, then a 3-member committee to investigate the charges against the judge of the Supreme Court or High Court will be constituted. Now, what are the grounds for the impeachment of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court? So the charges, the grounds are proved misbehavior and incapacity. And this 3-member committee finds that the judge to be guilty of the charges, misbehavior or incapacity, then the house in which the motion was introduced can take up the consideration of the motion. So once they have taken up for the consideration of the motion, so this motion has to be passed by a special majority. This has to be passed by a special majority in both houses of the parliament, right? What is the special majority? So that is the total membership of the house and the majority of not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting. So this resolution has to be, this motion has to be passed by a special majority. So after this motion is passed with a special majority in each house of the parliament, an address is presented to the president for the removal of judge, and ultimately president passes an order removing the judge. So this is how the impeachment process of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are generally takes place. So I hope you have understood and this is clear for you. So next is wholesale price index. So indicates that inflation drops to 9-month low. So the context is that the wholesale price index inflation eased to around 13-month low. So it has eased to around 13-month low to 0.85% in April 2025. So sharply declined from 2.05% in March. However, this is primarily driven by falling fuel and primary article prices. So if you look into the major commodities which forms part of the wholesale price index calculation, so 64.97% weight is given for the manufactured products. So manufactured products would have 64.97% of weight, followed by the primary articles and then the fuel and power, right? So this is how the wholesale price index actually have the weight of different items. Now, what is a wholesale price index? Now, wholesale price index is it is actually the measure of average changes in the prices of goods which are traded in bulk, right? So it is not at the consumer level. It is not at the consumer level, it is at the production level, right? So the first stage after production, so buying those products in a bulk, and then sending those goods for the next stage, right? So the wholesale price index generally measures the average change in the prices of goods traded in bulk by wholesalers to other businesses. So that is the wholesale price index inflation. And in fact, the wholesale price index inflation, so it reflects the inflation at the level of producer but not at the level of consumer. So which reflects the inflation at the level of consumer, that is CPI. CPI reflects the inflation at the level of consumer, but WPI reflects inflation at the level of producer before the goods actually reach the final consumer or end consumer. And who publishes the wholesale price index? Who administers this wholesale price index? So it is published every month by Office of the Economic Advisor for Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So this is very, very important. So you have to remember this because there is a high chance of this being asked for your exam. Now, what are the objectives of compiling this wholesale price index? So the objective is that to take price movements in wholesale markets and also assess the cost pressure which are faced by the producers and the industries. Secondly, it also aids in understanding the supply demand dynamics across primary, energy and the manufacturing sectors as well. So these are the important objectives of compiling the wholesale price index. So the base year of the wholesale price index is 2011-12. So that has been revised from earlier existing 2004 and 5. And in fact, the base year for alignment with GDP and also index of industrial production data. So this is also very important. You have to remember the base year as well. And method. So the method actually includes the weighted average price of a basket of around 697 items. So across three main groups, we have already understood those three main groups. One is the primary articles. So that has the weight of 22.62%. Fuel and power, it has the weight of 13.15%. And then the manufactured items, it is having the weight of 64.23%. Now, what are the key features of the wholesale price index inflation? So it actually covers only goods. Services are not included in it, but consumer price index services will also be included along with goods. And the wholesale price index also reflects the prices and price trends before the retail level, unlike the consumer price index that tracks the consumer prices. And in fact, the wholesale price index, it is published every month, thereby showing price changes over an entire month. However, Reserve Bank of India will not use the wholesale price index for its monetary policy considerations, right? So it is useful for the industry, but it is not used by the Reserve Bank of India for monetary policy decisions. So that you have to understand, but monetary policy decisions are primarily based on the consumer price index. So other details about the consumer price index have been given. So the consumer price index indicates the average change in the prices of both goods and services at the retail level, and it is published by National Statistical Office. And it includes both goods and services, and it is calculated at the final stage of transaction, and it is calculated at the consumers, and it includes education, communication, transportation, recreation. So all these activities forms part of the calculation of consumer price index, and its base year is 2012, right? So 2012 is the base year of the consumer price index inflation calculation. So I hope you have understood this, and that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you have any doubts regarding this lecture, please kindly comment those doubts